The crystalline spires of New Geneva's interstellar embassy complex caught the last rays of Earth's setting sun, casting rainbow fragments across the gathered dignitaries below. Sarah Chen adjusted her ceremonial sash, midnight blue with silver threading, representing Earth's diplomatic corps, and tried to quiet the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. After 15 years in diplomatic service, she'd thought herself immune to pre-event jitters. But this wasn't just any diplomatic function. This was first contact with the Lyran Confederation. The Lyrans had appeared at the edge of human space 6 months ago, their sleek bioorganic ships causing quite a stir among Earth's scientific community. Initial communications had been promising. They were a peaceful, highly advanced species seeking cultural exchange and possible trade agreements. Tonight's embassy ball would be the first face-to-face meeting between human and Lyran leadership. Nervous, Amanda Rodriguez, Sarah's colleague and friend, appeared at her elbow with 2 flutes of champagne. She handed one to Sarah, who accepted it gratefully. That obvious. Sarah took a small sip, letting the bubbles dance on her tongue. Only to someone who's known you since academy days. Amanda's dark eyes sparkled with amusement. You've got that same look you had before your first diplomatic simulation. Sarah chuckled, remembering that disaster of a training exercise. At least this time I won't have to negotiate peace terms with Professor Matthews pretending to be an angry Martian settler. Their laughter was interrupted by a sudden hush falling over the gathered crowd. Sarah turned toward the main entrance and felt her breath catch in her throat. The Lyran delegation had arrived. They moved like living art through the doorway, their bodies seeming to flow rather than walk. Their skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, shifting colors that rippled across their humanoid forms in mesmerizing waves. Each wore what appeared to be living fabric, clothes that moved and adjusted themselves constantly in subtle ways. Leading the delegation was a figure that immediately drew Sarah's attention. Taller than the others, with patterns that seemed more complex, more deliberate in their movement. The Lyran's skin tone shifted between deep azure and violet, with occasional flashes of silver that reminded Sarah of shooting stars. Ambassador Kazari, Amanda whispered, unnecessarily. Everyone knew who the Lyran ambassador was by now, though this was the first time any human had seen them in person. Kazari's head turned, and Sarah found herself looking into eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies, swirling depths of purple and silver that somehow managed to convey both ancient wisdom and childlike curiosity. The ambassador's gaze met hers for just a moment, but Sarah felt as though she'd been scanned down to her very atoms. The formal introductions began, a carefully choreographed dance of protocol and ceremony. Sarah stood with the rest of Earth's diplomatic corps as each member of both delegations was presented. When her name was called, she stepped forward and gave the traditional Earth diplomatic bow. As she straightened, she noticed Kazari watching her with what seemed like particular interest. The evening progressed as these events typically did. Speeches were made, toasts were offered, and carefully worded pleasantries were exchanged. Sarah found herself drawn into several conversations with junior members of the Lyran delegation, fascinated by their unique way of expressing themselves. The Lyrans didn't just speak with words. Their skin patterns and body movements were an integral part of their language. You watch with understanding eyes. The voice behind her was melodic, almost musical, with harmonics that seemed to resonate in her chest. Sarah turned to find Ambassador Kazari standing there, those galaxy-filled eyes focused intently on her. Ambassador, Sarah bowed slightly. I'm honored by your attention. Please. Kazari's skin rippled with patterns that Sarah somehow knew indicated amusement. Such formality seems unnecessary between kindred spirits. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Kindred spirits. I have been observing how you interact with my people. Kazari moved closer, and Sarah caught a faint scent like starlight and ocean spray. You don't just listen to their words. You watch their patterns, their movements. You seek to understand the whole of their communication. It would be poor diplomacy to ignore half of what someone is saying, Sarah replied, then added with a small smile, though I'm afraid I'm still very much a novice at reading Lyran expressions. Kazari's skin shifted to a warm golden hue. Yet you try. That is more than most. Would you care to learn more? Before Sarah could respond, the orchestra began playing a new piece, one specifically composed for this historic evening. It combined Earth classical music with harmonics designed to complement Lyran musical traditions. Zari's patterns shifted to something Sarah hadn't seen before, rapid swirls of silver and blue that seemed to dance with the music. Ah, perfect timing. Would you join me in movement? It is through dance that many of our most important cultural exchanges begin. Sarah hesitated for just a moment. There had been briefings about Lyran dance customs, but they had been frustratingly vague. Still, refusing such a direct invitation from the ambassador would be diplomatically awkward at best. I would be honored, she said, taking Kazari's offered hand. The ambassador's skin was warm, and Sarah felt a slight tingling sensation where they touched, as if tiny electrical currents were passing between them. Kazari led her to the center of the ballroom, where other couples, both human and Lyran, were beginning to gather. The ambassador's free hand came to rest lightly on her waist, and Sarah felt that same tingling sensation spread across her side. Follow my lead, Kazari said softly, but do not mirror me. In Lyran dance, each partner must find their own path while maintaining harmony with the other. It is a metaphor for life itself. The music swelled, and Sarah found herself being guided through movements unlike any dance she'd experienced before. It wasn't just steps and turns, it was more like a shared meditation in motion. Kazari's bioluminescent patterns seemed to flow out from where their bodies touched, creating shapes and colors that danced with the music. Sarah lost track of time as they moved together. The rest of the ballroom seemed to fade away, until all that existed was the music, the movement, and the swirling patterns of light that connected them. She felt as though she could read Kazari's patterns now, understanding the emotions and thoughts they conveyed without conscious effort. When the music finally ended, Sarah was surprised to find herself slightly out of breath. She looked up at Kazari and found the ambassador's patterns glowing with what she somehow knew was joy and satisfaction. You dance as you observe, with your whole being, Kazari said. Few humans have shown such natural aptitude for our ways of expression. Thank you, Sarah replied, suddenly aware that they were still holding hands. It was extraordinary. Kazari's patterns shifted to something more formal, more ceremonial. Then it is decided. I look forward to our future together, Sarah Chen. Before Sarah could ask what that meant, Kazari was called away by other members of the Lyran delegation. She watched the ambassador go, still feeling the ghost of that tingling sensation where their hands had touched. Sarah, Amanda appeared beside her, eyes wide. Do you have any idea what you just did? I danced with the ambassador, Sarah said, though something in Amanda's tone made her stomach tighten with apprehension. No, Amanda shook her head. According to my Lyran cultural advisor, you just participated in their most sacred bonding ritual. That wasn't just a dance, it was their equivalent of a marriage proposal, and from what I just saw, you accepted. Sarah felt the room spin slightly as the implications hit her. She looked across the ballroom to where Kazari stood, now deep in conversation with other Lyrans. The ambassador's patterns were still glowing with that same joy she'd seen after their dance. Oh, was all she could manage to say, as the evening's events suddenly took on an entirely new meaning. The music began again, but Sarah barely heard it over the pounding of her heart and the dawning realization that she had just accidentally gotten herself engaged to an alien ambassador. Thunder rumbled in the distance, as if the earth itself was commenting on the situation. It was going to be a very interesting diplomatic incident report to write. The morning after the embassy ball dawned with a kind of pristine clarity that seemed to mock Sarah's turbulent thoughts. She sat in her office at the diplomatic corps headquarters, staring at her terminal screen where dozens of messages blinked for attention. Most were marked urgent. 3 were from the Secretary General himself. You haven't touched your coffee, Amanda said from the doorway. In 15 years, I've never seen you ignore coffee. This must be serious. Sarah looked up at her friend, then down at the untouched cup on her desk. I just got off a 4-hour call with the Cultural Integration Committee. Do you know what they told me? There's no precedent for this. None. We've had diplomatic marriages before, even some accidental ones, but never with a species we've just met. Amanda closed the office door and sat down across from Sarah. What do the Lyrans say? That's the thing. Sarah ran her fingers through her hair, a nervous habit from her academy days. They're celebrating. According to Kazari's aide, this is seen as a perfect foundation for our species relationship. The timing, the spontaneity, even my particular role in the diplomatic corps, they're calling it stellar convergence. She gestured at her terminal. I've received 17 congratulatory messages from various Lyran noble houses. Apparently, I'm now considered part of their equivalent of aristocracy. One of them sent me what they're calling a small token of affection. It's a living crystal that sings in colors. It's currently being studied by 3 different xenobiology labs. But surely they understand this was a misunderstanding. Amanda leaned forward. That you didn't know what the dance meant. Sarah's laugh held a note of hysteria. That's the beautiful irony. They do understand. And to them, it makes it even more perfect. Kazari's aide explained that in Lyran culture, the most sacred bonds are often formed through what they call innocent wisdom, when someone acts in accordance with their deepest nature without the constraints of conscious intention. She stood up and began pacing, her diplomatic sash catching the morning light. They believe that by accepting the dance without knowing its significance, I proved myself more worthy of the bond than if I had known and chosen it deliberately. There's apparently ancient Lyran poetry about this exact type of situation. What does Kizari think about all this? Sarah stopped pacing. The ambassador's patterns from the previous night flashed in her memory, the joy, the certainty, the strange sense of rightness she felt during their dance. I haven't spoken to them directly since last night. There's a formal meeting scheduled for this afternoon. Amanda's expression softened. Are you ready for that? No, Sarah admitted, but I'm a diplomat. Being ready isn't always a prerequisite for doing what needs to be done. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings and messages. Sarah found herself explaining the situation to increasingly senior officials, each time feeling more surreal than the last. The human diplomatic course was split between those who saw this as a potential disaster and those who considered it an unprecedented opportunity. By the time Sarah entered the private meeting room that afternoon, she felt as though she'd aged a decade. Kizari was already there, standing by the window, patterns shifting in gentle waves of blue and silver. Sarah, the ambassador turned, and those galaxy-filled eyes met hers. Your patterns have troubled. Sarah blinked. My patterns. The energy fields that surround all living things. Kizari moved closer. Humans cannot see them as we do, but they are there. Yours speak of confusion, concern, and the ambassador's head tilted slightly, curiosity. You can read human emotions that way. Only with those I am bonded to. Kazari's patterns shifted to something warm and gentle. It is one of the gifts of the dance we shared. Sarah took a deep breath. About that dance, Ambassador. Kazari, the Lyran corrected softly. We are far beyond titles now. Kazari, Sarah continued, I need to be direct. I didn't know what the dance meant. In human culture, dancing at diplomatic functions is just dancing. I had no idea I was participating in a bonding ritual. Zari's patterns rippled with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as amusement. Of course you didn't. That is what makes it perfect. Perfect. Sarah fought to keep her diplomatic composure. How can a complete misunderstanding be perfect? Because it wasn't a misunderstanding at all. Kizari moved closer still, and Sarah felt that same tingling sensation from the night before. The movements of the dance are merely symbolic. The true bonding occurs when two souls recognize each other across the vast distances of space and time. Your conscious mind may not have known what was happening, but your soul did. The ambassador's patterns shifted to something deep and complex, like watching a nebula form. When we danced, you didn't just follow the steps. You understood the language of my patterns without training. You matched your energy to mine without instruction. These are things that cannot be taught or learned. They can only be known. Sarah found herself speechless, caught between diplomatic training that demanded she find a way to resolve this situation and something deeper, more instinctive, that resonated with Kazari's words. She started, then stopped, searching for the right words. Even if what you say is true, there are protocols, procedures. Our species have barely begun to know each other. This kind of personal connection between diplomats could complicate everything. Kazari's patterns sparkled with what might have been laughter, or simplify everything. Think, Sarah. What better foundation for understanding between our peoples than this? A bond formed through dance, through the universal language of movement and music. Is that not preferable to one built on careful words and calculated agreements? That's not how human diplomacy works, Sarah protested, but she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Perhaps, Kazari acknowledged, that is exactly why it should work this way. Your people prize what you call thinking outside the box. Is this not an opportunity to do exactly that? Sarah found herself smiling despite her concerns. Using human idioms against me. That's playing dirty, Ambassador. I prefer to think of it as cultural adaptation. Kazari's patterns swirled playfully. Another skill that will serve us well in our future together. A chime sounded, indicating the end of their allocated meeting time. Sarah realized with a start that they had spent the entire session discussing philosophy rather than addressing any of the practical concerns she'd meant to raise. We have another meeting scheduled tomorrow, Kazari said, moving toward the door. Perhaps then we can discuss what you call protocols and procedures, though I suspect you'll find that our people's approaches to such things are not as different as you might think. As the ambassador left, Sarah remained standing by the window, watching the sun play across the crystalline spires of the embassy complex. She touched her hand to her chest, where she could still feel the echo of that strange resonance from their dance. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the diplomatic disaster everyone feared. Maybe it was exactly what both their species needed, a reminder that sometimes the heart understands what the mind cannot yet grasp. Thunder rumbled again in the distance, but this time it sounded less like a warning and more like applause. News of the accidental bonding spread through diplomatic channels like wildfire. Within days, Sarah found herself at the center of an interstellar media storm. Every news outlet from Earth to the outer colonies wanted to know more about the human diplomat who had inadvertently married an alien ambassador through dance. Sarah stood in the embassy's meditation garden, watching the living crystal fountains the Lyrans had installed as a gift to Earth. The water flowed in impossible patterns, creating three-dimensional shapes that shifted and changed with the viewer's movements. It was beautiful, alien, and somehow perfectly natural all at once, much like our current situation. The Human Relations Committee has concerns, Director Phillips said, his hologram flickering slightly in the garden's shifting light. He was Sarah's direct superior and had been handling most of the political fallout. They're worried this could be seen as a deliberate attempt by the Lyrans to gain leverage over Earth's diplomatic course. That's ridiculous, Sarah replied, watching a water sculpture form into what looked like a dancing couple before dissolving again. The Lyrans value spontaneity and natural connection. If anything, a calculated political move would be deeply offensive to them. And how do you know that? Phillips asked, his holographic eyebrow raising. We've known about their existence for 6 months. You've been bonded to their ambassador for 5 days. Sarah touched the small crystal pendant Kazari had given her that morning, another small token of affection that the scientists were desperate to study. She could feel it humming softly against her skin, its frequency matching her heartbeat. I just know, she said simply. The same way I know that right now, you're more worried about the trade negotiations than any political implications. Phillips's hologram flickered again, this time from surprise. How did you? Your left hand keeps twitching toward where you usually keep your data pad, Sarah explained, but she wasn't entirely sure how she'd noticed that detail. You only do that when you're thinking about the shipping route agreements. The director was silent for a moment. You've changed, Sarah. The whole diplomatic course has noticed it. You're picking up on things, understanding patterns that shouldn't be possible for someone without years of specialized training. It's the bond, a melodic voice said from behind them. Kazari stepped into the garden, patterns shifting in gentle waves of green and gold that Sarah somehow knew meant contentment and amusement. Or rather, it's Sarah's natural abilities being enhanced by our connection. Phillips's hologram straightened. Ambassador, I wasn't aware you would be joining us. I felt Sarah's contemplation, Kazari said simply, as if sensing another person's emotional state across the embassy complex was the most natural thing in the world. And I believe this conversation might benefit from some Lyran perspective. The ambassador moved to stand beside Sarah, and immediately the crystal pendant's hum changed frequency, creating a harmony that made the water sculptures dance more vigorously. What you're witnessing, Kazari continued, is not some political machination or attempt at manipulation. It is the natural result of two compatible souls finding each other across the vast distances of space. Sarah's heightened awareness, her increasing ability to read patterns and intentions, these are gifts that come from opening oneself to true understanding. Gifts that could be very useful in diplomatic negotiations, Phillips noted, his tone carefully neutral. Director, Sarah interjected, feeling a flash of irritation that made Kazari's patterns ripple with shared emotion. If you're implying that I would use this connection to gain unfair advantage. No, Phillips held up his hands. I'm merely pointing out what others will say. The Centaurian delegation has already filed a formal protest, claiming this gives Earth preferential access to Lyran leadership. Kazari's patterns shifted to something Sarah recognized as diplomatic amusement, the Lyran equivalent of rolling one's eyes. The Centaurians protest everything. Last week, they filed a complaint about the color of our ships, claiming the bioluminescent hulls were unnecessarily flashy. Despite herself, Sarah laughed. The sound echoed off the crystal fountains, creating tiny rainbows in the water droplets. She felt Kazari's pleasure at her amusement ripple through their bond. The point remains, Phillips pressed, though Sarah could see him fighting a smile. We need to address these concerns formally. The Interstellar Council is convening an emergency session to discuss the implications of this union. Then we shall attend, Kazari said simply. Together. And they will see what I have already seen, that this bond strengthens not just us, but the potential for true understanding between our peoples. The ambassador's hand brushed against Sarah's, and suddenly she could see it too. Not just the political implications or the diplomatic concerns, but the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her and Kazari. This was about showing both species that genuine connection was possible, that understanding could transcend the barriers of biology and culture. Director, Sarah said, her voice firm with newfound conviction, schedule the council session. But first, I think it's time we show them exactly what this bond means. What do you have in mind? Phillips asked, looking both intrigued and slightly worried. Sarah smiled, feeling Kazari's approval through their connection. The Lyrans have a tradition of demonstrating bonds through shared creation. I think it's time we created something together, something that both our peoples can understand. The Harmony Gardens, Kazari said, patterns brightening with excitement. Yes, perfect. A space where both species can experience the type of connection we share, even if only for a moment. The what? Phillips looked between them confused. You'll see, Sarah promised. Sometimes the best way to understand something is to experience it firsthand. Have the council members meet us in the embassy's main atrium tomorrow morning, and tell them to wear comfortable shoes. There may be dancing involved. As Phillips's hologram flickered out, Sarah turned to Kazari. Are you sure about this? Creating a harmony garden takes enormous energy. Your people usually spend months preparing for such an endeavor. Sarah's patterns swirled with confidence and affection. Months of preparation can be replaced by moments of true harmony. Together, we can show them what is possible when two cultures don't just meet, but truly blend. The crystal pendant hummed louder, and the water sculptures began forming new shapes, DNA helices that twisted together, forming patterns that were neither human nor Lyran, but something entirely new. As they stood there, planning their demonstration, Sarah realized that this was what humanity had always dreamed of, not just meeting alien life, but truly understanding it. And sometimes, understanding started with a single dance. Thunder rolled overhead, but this time it sounded like music, earth and sky joining in their own harmony, echoing the changes taking place below. News of the accidental bonding spread through diplomatic channels like wildfire. Within days, Sarah found herself at the center of an interstellar media storm. Every news outlet from Earth to the outer colonies wanted to know more about the human diplomat who had inadvertently married an alien ambassador through dance. Sarah stood in the embassy's meditation garden, watching the living crystal fountains the Lyrans had installed as a gift to Earth. The water flowed in impossible patterns, creating three-dimensional shapes that shifted and changed with the viewer's movements. It was beautiful, alien, and somehow perfectly natural all at once, much like her current situation. The Human Relations Committee has concerns, Director Phillips said, his hologram flickering slightly in the garden's shifting light. He was Sarah's direct superior and had been handling most of the political fallout. They're worried this could be seen as a deliberate attempt by the Lyrans to gain leverage over Earth's diplomatic course. That's ridiculous, Sarah replied, watching a water sculpture form into what looked like a dancing couple before dissolving again. The Lyrans value spontaneity and natural connection. If anything, a calculated political move would be deeply offensive to them. And how do you know that? Phillips asked, his holographic eyebrow raising. We've known about their existence for 6 months. You've been bonded to their ambassador for 5 days. Sarah touched the small crystal pendant Kazari had given her that morning, another small token of affection that the scientists were desperate to study. She could feel it humming softly against her skin, its frequency matching her heartbeat. I just know, she said simply. The same way I know that right now, you're more worried about the trade negotiations than any political implications. Phillips's hologram flickered again, this time from surprise. How did you? Your left hand keeps twitching toward where you usually keep your data pad, Sarah explained, though she wasn't entirely sure how she'd noticed that detail. You only do that when you're thinking about the shipping route agreements. The director was silent for a moment. You've changed, Sarah. The whole diplomatic course has noticed it. You're picking up on things, understanding patterns that shouldn't be possible for someone without years of specialized training. It's the bond, a melodic voice said from behind them. Kazari stepped into the garden, patterns shifting in gentle waves of green and gold that Sarah somehow knew meant contentment and amusement. Or rather, it's Sarah's natural abilities being enhanced by our connection. Phillips's hologram straightened. Ambassador, I wasn't aware you would be joining us. I felt Sarah's contemplation, Kazari said simply, as if sensing another person's emotional state across the embassy complex was the most natural thing in the world. And I believe this conversation might benefit from some Lyran perspective. The ambassador moved to stand beside Sarah, and immediately the crystal pendant's hum changed frequency, creating a harmony that made the water sculptures dance more vigorously. What you're witnessing, Kazari continued, is not some political machination or attempt at manipulation. It is the natural result of two compatible souls finding each other across the vast distances of space. Sarah's heightened awareness, her increasing ability to read patterns and intentions. These are gifts that come from opening oneself to true understanding. Gifts that could be very useful in diplomatic negotiations, Phillips noted, his tone carefully neutral. Director, Sarah interjected, feeling a flash of irritation that made Kazari's patterns ripple with shared emotion. If you're implying that I would use this connection to gain unfair advantage. No, Phillips held up his hands. "I'm merely pointing out what others will say. The Centaurian delegation has already filed a formal protest, claiming this gives Earth preferential access to Lyran leadership." Kazari's patterns shifted to something Sarah recognized as diplomatic amusement, the Lyran equivalent of rolling one's eyes. The Centaurians protest everything. Last week, they filed a complaint about the color of our ships, claiming the bioluminescent hulls were unnecessarily flashy. Despite herself, Sarah laughed. The sound echoed off the crystal fountains, creating tiny rainbows in the water droplets. She felt Kazari's pleasure at her amusement ripple through their bond. "The point remains," Phillips pressed, though Sarah could see him fighting a smile. "We need to address these concerns formally. The Interstellar Council is convening an emergency session to discuss the implications of this union." "Then we shall attend," Kazari said simply. "Together. And they will see what I have already seen, that this bond strengthens not just us, but the potential for true understanding between our peoples." The ambassador's hand brushed against Sarah's, and suddenly she could see it too. Not just the political implications or the diplomatic concerns, but the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her and Kazari. This was about showing both species that genuine connection was possible, that understanding could transcend the barriers of biology and culture. "Director," Sarah said, her voice firm with newfound conviction, "schedule the council session. But first, I think it's time we showed them exactly what this bond means." "What do you have in mind?" Phillips asked, looking both intrigued and slightly worried. Sarah smiled, feeling Kazari's approval through their connection. The Lyrans have a tradition of demonstrating bonds through shared creation. "I think it's time we created something together, something that both our peoples can understand." "The Harmony Gardens," Kazari said, patterns brightening with excitement. "Yes, perfect. A space where both species can experience the type of connection we share, even if only for a moment." "The what?" Phillips looked between them, confused. "You'll see," Sarah promised. "Sometimes the best way to understand something is to experience it firsthand. Have the council members meet us in the embassy's main atrium tomorrow morning. And tell them to wear comfortable shoes. There may be dancing involved." As Phillips's hologram flickered out, Sarah turned to Kazari. "Are you sure about this? Creating a harmony garden takes enormous energy. Your people usually spend months preparing for such an endeavor." Kazari's patterns swirled with confidence and affection. "Months of preparation can be replaced by moments of true harmony. Together, we can show them what is possible when two cultures don't just meet, but truly blend." The crystal pendant hummed louder, and the water sculptures began forming new shapes, DNA helices that twisted together, forming patterns that were neither human nor Lyran, but something entirely new. As they stood there, planning their demonstration, Sarah realized that this was what humanity had always dreamed of, not just meeting alien life, but truly understanding it. And sometimes, understanding started with a single dance. Thunder rolled overhead, but this time it sounded like music, earth and sky joining in their own harmony, echoing the changes taking place below. The embassy's main atrium had never seen anything quite like this. Council members from 17 different star systems stood in a loose circle, their expressions ranging from diplomatic neutrality to obvious skepticism. In the center, Sarah and Kazari worked in perfect synchronization, their movements creating ripples of energy that even the most scientifically minded observers couldn't deny. The harmony garden was taking shape around them. Living crystals grew from the floor in spiraling patterns, each one humming with frequencies that matched both human and Lyran biological rhythms. Bioluminescent vines, a gift from Kazari's home world, wound their way up the crystals, their colors shifting in response to the emotions of those nearby. The resonance patterns are off the charts, Dr. Helena Martinez, Earth's leading xenobiologist, muttered into her scanner. They're creating stable quantum entanglements between organic matter from both worlds. This shouldn't be possible. Sarah barely heard the scientist's commentary. She was lost in the dance of creation, her movements perfectly mirroring Kazari's while remaining uniquely human. Through their bond, she could feel the garden taking shape not just physically, but on levels her human senses couldn't directly perceive. Now, Kazari's voice resonated in her mind. Show them what harmony truly means. Sarah reached out, both physically and through their connection, and touched one of the crystal formations. Immediately, the entire garden came alive with music, not just sound, but light and vibration and something deeper that seemed to bypass the senses entirely and speak directly to the soul. The council members gasped collectively as the garden began to affect them. Each crystal formation acted as a tiny window into the bond Sarah and Kazari shared, allowing others to experience for a moment what it felt like to truly understand someone across the barriers of species and culture. Remarkable, the Centaurian delegate whispered, their previous protests forgotten as they watched their own bioluminescent patterns begin to synchronize with the garden's rhythms. We can feel everything, Sarah completed the thought, knowing exactly what they were experiencing. This is what true diplomatic harmony looks like, not just understanding words or actions, but feeling the intentions and emotions behind them. Kazari's patterns swirled with pride and joy. The garden responds to all who enter with an open heart. It translates emotional and mental states across species barriers, allowing for communication on levels previously thought impossible. The Arcturian representative, an ancient being who rarely spoke at council sessions, stepped forward. Their crystalline form resonated with the garden's frequencies. This is more than a diplomatic tool. You have created a bridge between worlds. Sarah nodded, feeling Kazari's agreement through their bond. That's exactly what it is, and what our accidental marriage represents, a bridge. A proof that deep understanding between different species isn't just possible, it's natural when we allow ourselves to be open to it. Director Phillips, who had been watching from the sidelines, finally spoke. And this garden, it can be replicated. In every major diplomatic center, Kazari confirmed. Each one unique to its location and the species it serves, but all connected through the same principles of harmony and understanding. A network of bridges across the galaxy. The garden's crystals pulsed with new energy as the implications rippled through the assembled diplomats. This wasn't just about one human and one Lurin anymore. This was about revolutionizing interstellar diplomacy itself. Of course, Sarah added, feeling it important to maintain perspective, the gardens are just tools. They can facilitate understanding, but they can't create it. That still requires willingness from all parties involved. She gestured to the nearest crystal formation, which was displaying a real-time translation of emotional states between 3 different species. What Kazari and I share, what allowed us to create this, it's not just about the bond itself. It's about being willing to see beyond our own cultural assumptions and truly open ourselves to new ways of understanding. The Rigelian ambassador, who had been silently observing until now, stepped forward. Their typically rigid posture had softened in the garden's influence. You speak of willingness, Diplomat Chen, but how can we be certain this level of connection is safe? That it cannot be used to manipulate or deceive. Before Sarah could respond, she felt Kazari's amusement ripple through their bond. The ambassador's patterns shifted to what she now recognized as their teaching configuration. Deception, Kazari said softly, becomes impossible at this level of connection. Try it yourself, Ambassador. Attempt to project a false emotion in this space. The Rigelian's antennae twitched, their species equivalent of a frown, but they closed their eyes in concentration. The nearest crystal immediately began pulsing with discordant colors, creating visible disruption in the garden's harmonious patterns. You see, Kazari continued, the garden doesn't just translate emotions and intentions, it reveals their truth. In this space, diplomatic doublespeak and hidden agendas cannot survive. It demands authenticity. Sarah felt a surge of pride, both her own and Kazari's, as understanding dawned on the council members' faces. This was why their accidental bond had been so perfect, so right. It had been built on pure, unintentional truth, the most powerful foundation possible. The garden's crystals hummed in harmony with their realization, creating a symphony of light and sound that made several of the more sensitive delegates tear up with emotion. Even the Centaurian representative, who had been so opposed to their union, was swaying slightly to the garden's rhythms. The committee will need time to process these developments, Director Phillips said finally, though Sarah could see he was fighting to maintain his professional demeanor in the face of the garden's effects. But I think it's safe to say that the concerns about preferential access have been addressed. More than addressed, the Arcturian elder chimed in, their crystalline form now perfectly in tune with the garden's frequencies. Transformed into opportunity, this could be the beginning of a new era in interstellar relations. As the council members began to discuss the implications among themselves, Sarah felt Kezari's hand slip into hers. The garden responded immediately, creating a display of interweaving patterns that represented their shared emotions. "You know," Sarah said quietly, watching the patterns dance, "when I went to that ball, I was hoping to advance human-Lyran relations. I just didn't expect to do it quite so personally." Kezari's patterns sparkled with laughter. "The universe, my beloved, has a sense of humor, and occasionally it knows better than we do what is needed." Around them, the Harmony Garden continued to grow and evolve, each new crystal formation representing another potential bridge between worlds. It was beautiful, unexpected, and perfectly natural, just like the dance that had started it all. Thunder rolled outside, but this time it was joined by the sound of rain. Earth's water meeting Lyran crystals, creating music that had never been heard before in the history of either world. A new harmony was beginning, and it had started with a simple misunderstanding about a dance. 1 month after the creation of the first Harmony Garden, Sarah found herself standing on the observation deck of Kezari's personal vessel, watching Earth rotate slowly below. The planet looked different now, its familiar blues and greens interwoven with the subtle shimmer of Lyran environmental harmonics, a gift from their people that helped clean Earth's atmosphere while creating beautiful auroral displays. "You're thinking about the upcoming ceremony," Kezari said, their patterns shifting in gentle waves of silver and blue. It wasn't a question. Through their strengthened bond, they could now share not just emotions, but complete thoughts when in close proximity. "Can you blame me?" Sarah turned to face her bondmate. It's not every day a human participates in a traditional Lyran life-bond ceremony, especially not one that's being broadcast across 17 star systems. The ceremony would formalize their accidental bond in the eyes of both cultures, combining Earth and Lyran traditions in a way never attempted before. Like everything else about their relationship, it had become a symbol of something much larger than themselves. "Your mother's arrival shuttle is approaching," Kezari noted, their patterns brightening with anticipation. "She brings strong emotions." Sarah laughed. "That's putting it mildly. She's still trying to wrap her head around having an alien in-law, though I think your gift of those self-maintaining garden crystals helped win her over." The shuttle docked with a soft thrum that Sarah felt through the deck plates. Moments later, Helen Chen strode onto the observation deck, her traditional Chinese formal wear complemented by a Lyran Harmony crystal that glowed softly at her throat. "Mom," Sarah stepped forward to embrace her mother, feeling Kezari's warmth through their bond at witnessing the human display of affection. "Daughter," Helen replied, then turned to Kezari and performed a perfect Lyran greeting gesture, her hands creating patterns in the air that made the ambassador's skin shimmer with pleased surprise. "Bond child." "You've been practicing," Kezari noted, their patterns showing deep respect. "Of course I have," Helen said firmly. "If my daughter is going to be part of making history, I'm certainly not going to embarrass her by getting the gestures wrong." She paused, looking out at Earth below. "Though I must say, when I imagined Sarah's wedding day, I didn't picture it happening in orbit." "The ceremony will be grounded as well," Kezari assured her. "The orbital portion is merely to honor the cosmic nature of our union. The Earth-bound celebration will incorporate all traditional human elements you requested." Helen nodded approvingly. "Good. And the dress arrives within the hour, Sarah confirmed, along with the living fabric overlay the Lyran artisans created to complement it. Wait until you see how they interact. It's like wearing starlight. A soft chime interrupted them, another shuttle approaching. This one carried the Lyran High Council members who would officiate the ceremony, along with Kizari's extended family group. Sarah felt a flutter of nervous excitement through their bond. "Your family patterns are strong today," she noted to Kizari, using the Lyran phrase she'd learned. Kizari's skin rippled with pleasure at her use of their language. "They are eager to meet you properly, especially my first bearer. They've been studying human familial customs extensively." "As extensively as I've been studying Lyran ones, I hope," Helen muttered, straightening her already perfect collar. "These past weeks have felt like being back in university." Sarah watched her mother fuss with her clothes and felt a surge of love so strong it made the harmony crystals throughout the ship pulse briefly brighter. This wasn't easy for any of them. They were literally making up the rules as they went along, finding ways to blend traditions that had evolved light years apart. The ship's living walls shimmered as the new arrivals came aboard. Sarah could feel them through the harmony network that now connected all major diplomatic vessels, a development that had sprung from her and Kizari's discovery of shared resonance. The Lyran family group moved like a school of exotic fish, their patterns flowing and shifting in complex familial harmonies. Kizari's first bearer entered first, their patterns a more complex version of Kizari's own. They moved directly to Helen and performed a perfect human bow before speaking in carefully practiced English. "Mother of my child's chosen," they said, their patterns expressing sincere respect. "Your daughter's soul light strengthens our family's harmony." Helen, to her credit, didn't miss a beat. She responded with a traditional Lyran family greeting, her movements precise. "Your child's patterns bring joy to our bloodline." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the two families begin to interact, each trying so hard to honor the other's traditions while creating something new together. This was what she and Kizari had hoped for, not just tolerance or understanding, but genuine appreciation between their peoples. Through their bond, she felt Kizari's own emotion at the scene. Their patterns had shifted to a deep gold that seemed to radiate warmth. "They are building bridges of their own," the ambassador observed softly. "Just like we did," Sarah agreed, though hopefully with less accidental marriage proposals. Kizari's patterns sparkled with amusement. "I don't know. A few more accidental marriages might do wonders for interstellar relations." Their shared laughter drew attention from both families, and Sarah felt the harmony crystals throughout the ship respond, creating a subtle melody that seemed to weave all their emotions together into something greater than its parts. A gentle alert sounded, more vessels approaching. The other diplomatic delegations were arriving for the ceremony, each bringing their own traditions and perspectives to add to the momentous occasion. Sarah looked out at Earth again, watching the Lyran harmonics dance in the atmosphere. In just a few weeks, they had already begun to heal damage that humans had struggled with for centuries. It was a perfect metaphor for what was happening here, two cultures coming together to create something better than either could achieve alone. "Ready?" Kizari asked, offering their hand in a gesture that was neither purely human nor purely Lyran, but something wonderfully in between. Sarah took it, feeling the familiar tingle of their connection strengthen. "Ready. Let's show them what harmony really looks like." Above them, Earth continued its eternal dance around the sun, its skies now shimmering with new possibilities. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, nature's own approval of this unprecedented union of worlds. The ceremony began at sunset, the timing precisely calculated to align with both Earth's rotation and the harmonic frequencies of Kizari's home world. The grand hall of the Interstellar Embassy complex had been transformed into something that existed between worlds, neither fully Earth nor fully Lyran, but a space where both could exist in perfect balance. Living crystals grew in graceful arches overhead, their light pulsing in time with the combined heartbeats of all present. The The floor was inlaid with patterns that shifted and changed as people walked across it, creating ripples of light that spread outward like waves in a cosmic ocean. Diplomatic representatives from across known space sat in a spiral pattern that, viewed from above, resembled a galaxy in miniature. Sarah stood at the spiral's center, wearing a dress that defied traditional description. The base layer was classic Earth silk in midnight blue, but over it flowed living Lyran fabric that responded to her emotions, creating patterns that danced across the surface like stars wheeling across the night sky. Her mother had cried when she first saw it, saying it was like watching the universe itself embrace her daughter. Zari stood opposite her, their natural bioluminescence enhanced by ceremonial patterns that told the story of their people's journey through the stars. Their eyes, those endless pools of cosmic light, were fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made the harmony crystals hum with resonance. The Earth-appointed officiant, a distinguished diplomat named Dr. Maya Patel, stepped forward in perfect synchronization with her Lyran counterpart. Both wore garments that combined elements of their respective cultures, creating a visual representation of the harmony they were there to celebrate. "We gather today," Dr. Patel began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "to celebrate not just the union of two individuals, but the joining of two ways of seeing the universe." The Lyran officiant's patterns shifted in agreement, their melodic voice joining in perfect harmony. In the great dance of the cosmos, sometimes the most meaningful steps are the ones we take by chance. Sarah felt Kezari's amusement through their bond at this reference to their first meeting. Around them, the harmony crystals pulsed with shared emotion as the assembled delegates recognized the deeper truth in those words. The ceremony progressed, weaving together traditions from both worlds. When Sarah and Kezari exchanged vows, they did so in 3 languages simultaneously: English, Lyran harmonic patterns, and the universal language of resonance that they had discovered together. Their words created visible ripples in the air, the harmony crystals translating emotional content for all present to understand. "My patterns align with yours," Kezari spoke /sang/resonated, their skin shimmering with colors that made several empathic species in the audience gasp with appreciation. "In the grand dance of existence, you are my perfect partner." Sarah responded, her own body now glowing faintly with a quiet Lyran bioluminescence, a gift of their deepening bond. "Through all the stars and all the worlds, my heart beats in harmony with yours." The traditional exchange of rings was transformed into something more profound. Instead of simple bands of metal, they exchanged living crystals that grew from their own biological patterns, each containing a piece of their shared resonance. When the crystals touched their skin, they began to pulse in counterpoint, creating a harmony that spread through the entire hall. Dr. Patel smiled, her own ceremonial crystals glowing in response. "In human tradition, this would be the moment where we pronounce you married. But what we witness today goes beyond any one tradition." The Lyran officiant's patterns shifted to deep gold. "In our understanding, you have already been bonded since that first dance. Today, we simply celebrate as that bond reaches across cultures, across species, across the very stars themselves." Together, the officiants raised their hands, creating a gesture that belonged to neither culture but somehow represented both. "We recognize this union in the eyes of all worlds, all peoples, all ways of being." The harmony crystals erupted in a symphony of light and sound, their frequencies matching the exact moment when Sarah and Kezari had first danced together. The assembled delegates felt their own emotional responses being woven into the harmony, creating a moment of perfect understanding that transcended all barriers of species and culture. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks as Kezari drew her close. Their first kiss as a formally recognized couple sent ripples through the harmony network that would be felt in diplomatic centers across known space. It was a kiss that represented not just love between two beings, but hope for all peoples. As they turned to face their assembled guests, Sarah caught her mother's eye. Helen Chen was beaming, her hand clasped with Kezari's first bearers in a gesture of shared joy. Around them, representatives from worlds that had once been suspicious of each other were swaying gently to the harmony's rhythm, their differences forgotten in the face of such profound connection. You know, Sarah whispered to Kazari as they began the traditional first dance, a unique blend of earth waltz and Liran resonance patterns. When I joined the diplomatic corps, I never imagined I'd end up being a living symbol of interstellar cooperation. Kizari's patterns sparkled with joy and mischief, and I never imagined that a simple invitation to dance would lead to revolutionizing galactic diplomacy. It seems we are both overachievers. Their laughter joined the harmony, creating new patterns of light and sound that spread through the hall. Other couples began to join them on the dance floor, humans with Lyrans, Centaurians with Regelians, each finding their own way to move together in shared joy. Above them, through the crystal dome of the embassy, Earth's night sky was alive with aurora-like displays from the new harmonic atmospheric technology. It was as if the planet itself was celebrating, its colors dancing with the light of distant stars that now seemed not so distant at all. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled one final time, not a sound of warning or challenge, but a joyful drumbeat in the eternal dance of universe itself, a dance that had brought two beings from different worlds together, and in doing so, had opened the door to a whole new way of seeing the cosmos. Sarah and Kazari moved together in perfect synchronization, their combined patterns creating shapes of light that would be studied by xenanthropologists for generations to come. But in that moment, they weren't thinking about their place in history or their role in diplomacy. They were simply dancing, as they had that first night, letting their hearts lead them in a rhythm that transcended all boundaries of space and understanding. The harmony crystals pulsed one final time, creating a cascade of light that spread from Earth to the stars above, carrying with it a simple message that would echo through the ages. In the great dance of existence, love knows no borders.